Good morning and welcome to the Point. It has been another very busy week in Michigan when it comes to presidential politics. We started off the week talking to the Republican vice presidential candidate, Governor of Indiana, Mike Pence. It was just a few days after the bombings in New York and in New Jersey, and I asked candidate Pence what a Republican administration might do. How would a Trump-Pence administration approach this ongoing problem?
Well, I think it's first being willing to recognize that 7.5 years of Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton's leadership has weakened America's place in the world and frankly emboldened the enemies of this country. I mean, this weekend's terrorist attacks from Minnesota to New Jersey to New York are just the latest in a series of attacks brought to our shores or inspired here on our shores by radical Islamic terrorism and by the barbarous terrorist organization ISIS. When Donald Trump becomes president of the United States, we're going to rebuild our military. We're going to marshal the resources of the United States and our allies, including many moderate Arab countries, and we're going to confront ISIS, and we're going to defeat them at their source, and we're going to work day in and day out to defeat radical Islamic terrorism wherever it exists around the country. Donald Trump will bring strong American leadership to the world stage, which will be quite a departure from the weak and feckless leadership of the last 7.5 years.
Governor, switching gears a bit, it was last week when Mr. Trump came out and said that President Obama was born in the United States, period. Does that change anything about your campaign, or was that a preemptive strike so it's not an issue coming up in next week's debate?
I think Donald Trump made his position on that quite clear, and I truly do believe it's over. I mean, this campaign is really not about the debates of the past or of past elections. It really is about the future. I think the reason why we have such tremendous momentum all across this country, more and more people coming to support Donald Trump and his vision to make America great again, is because we're talking about a stronger America at home and abroad, particularly in the wake of the horrific terrorist attacks from Minnesota to New York and New Jersey this past weekend, to the rise of the ISIS caliphate overrunning large areas of Iraq, to a struggling economy. The American people know we can be better, we can be stronger on the world stage, we can be safer, and we can be more prosperous. And I think Donald Trump's message is resonating more and more every day. And his statement last week was about putting the debates of the past squarely in the past.
Governor, we've only got about 20 seconds left. I'm sorry to do this to you as a neighboring governor to Michigan. How important will Michigan play for your ticket in this race?
Michigan always looms large in presidential elections, never more so than this year. My belief is that Donald Trump's plan to get the economy moving again, particularly manufacturing, having tougher and smarter trade deals that will protect American jobs for American workers, is going to resonate here in Michigan, in the Hoosier State, and all across this country.
Later in the week, a surrogate for the Clinton-Kaine campaign, this time first daughter Chelsea Clinton, was in Grand Rapids. She talked to a group about why women's issues are important, and she talked about why she thinks her mother is qualified to be president. Let me ask you, when you're talking to groups like this about the enthusiasm level, I thought you made a very interesting point about what the media has prescribed about millennials, and they've also talked about the enthusiasm in this campaign. What do you see when you go to important states like Ohio and Michigan?
I see so much enthusiasm and I hear so much enthusiasm. That being said, I was raised to believe we have to work hard for every vote. We have to work hard to get as many people registered as possible. My mom set an ambitious goal to register more than 3 million new voters as part of this campaign. We're working hard toward that. I met someone in Toledo earlier, a UAW worker supporting my mom, who's registered 103 people just this week. And then to talk to people about what's really at stake in this election so people come out and vote here in Michigan on Election Day.
In Michigan, it is very important to have a broad diversity of voters. That question came up twice during your question and answer period. Did that surprise you?
It didn't surprise me. I mean, I'm asked a lot of questions across the country. Some are hyper-localized, not surprisingly. In Toledo, I was asked a lot about Lake Erie and whether my mom supports Great Lakes restoration. And here I wasn't surprised to be asked that question. I'm really proud that of my mom's state staff here in Michigan, more than 50% are women, more than 40% are minorities. I think that shows we recognize Michigan's a diverse state, and we have to make a real argument based on the issues, and that my mom will be the best president for all of us.
Monday is your daughter's second birthday.
It
Monday
is
the first debate. I won't ask you which is most important, but let's talk about that debate and debate preps.
Thank you for recognizing and taking for granted that my daughter's second birthday is definitely the most important
as
event happening that day.
As a father, I appreciate that. But let's talk a little bit about the debate preps and your mom's health. Obviously, well publicized over the past couple of weeks, and we know that she hasn't been on the campaign trail as much. But how is she preparing for this debate, and how is she feeling?
Well, I'm not part of debate prep, so I have no kind of special insight into that. I mean, probably not surprisingly, when I talked to her last night on FaceTime, she really wanted to see Charlotte and Aiden, her granddaughter and grandson. I have no doubt that she'll continue to make the argument that she's made throughout this campaign, that she's running for president to keep doing what she's fought for her whole life, for a better country so every child can live up to his God-given potential. That's not a slogan for her. That is the driving ethos of her life.
And how about her health? How's she feeling?
Oh, she's feeling great. Admittedly, as her daughter, I never really understand the questions about her health. I mean, when she was Secretary of State, she traveled more than 1 million miles, went to 112 countries. I don't think I could have done that, 30 years younger than she is. I wish she would have listened to her doctor, also as a daughter, and taken a couple of days off when she was diagnosed with pneumonia. I didn't even know she was sick. I'm glad she took a couple of days off to rest, and she's back on the campaign trail now.
Now, you mentioned as yourself being at the upper end of the millennial range. We know how important the young vote is. It certainly was a big difference for President Obama. How do you energize those folks? Not to suggest they aren't, but you've got to energize them. You've got to get them to turn out the polls. And we know that younger people's voting propensities are lower very often.
Well, first we have to get young people registered. Young people's registration rates are lower too, unfortunately. We think only about 55% of young people are registered. We're working hard to kind of move that up. And just to talk to young people, and really people of any age, that whatever issue you care most about, it's at stake in this election, whether that's college and higher education affordability, the environment, criminal justice reform. Those are three things that I hear a lot about young people being focused on. And I think my mom has stronger plans. I mean, she's also the only person who recognizes that climate change is real and also a real opportunity for us as a country, and she has a stronger record in each of those, and I hope that'll matter to young voters come election day.
Women's issues aren't just about women, is the first thing you started with today, and you explained how women's issues are economic issues and vice versa. In the last 45 seconds we have, explain that.
Well, if we just think about kind of wages, 2/3 of minimum wage earners are women. So when we talk about raising the minimum wage, that's also talking about what's good for women and for families, particularly given that here in Michigan, there are about 500,000 women who are heads of their own households. So raising the minimum wage and then ensuring they're being paid equally for equal work, that's about economic justice. That's also, of course, about gender equality and supporting women and families.
With just more than 6 weeks before the election and polls showing that this race is still very tight, you can expect more visits here in the state as Michigan becomes more and more important when you start talking about battleground states. We'll have more about that next week and more to the point in just a moment. Welcome back to the Point. Well, it is an election year, and that means that there are a lot of politicians out doing what politicians do, trying to get reelected. However, you may be surprised to know that the Michigan State Legislature has been doing something else. They've been passing legislation, and quite a bit of it. Quite a bit of it has been bipartisan, too. We sat down with Senate Majority Leader Arlen Meekhof to talk about what's going on in the Senate and House and how it could impact you. Senator, it has been a busy period for you and your colleagues over in Lansing, and I would say a little uncharacteristically so, because I think sometimes in an election year, some things go undone. Now, in fairness, the Senate's not up for election, but nonetheless, you've been working on a lot of legislation. Some of it's passed pretty handily. Let's talk starting with the marijuana bills that passed out. The governor's already signed those.
Correct.
It changes and refines the way we handle medical marijuana. It was pretty lively debate on the Senate floor, but it passed nonetheless. What's your take on that?
Well, since 2008, the citizens actually put the law in place to have medical marijuana. And what we've just done is to take the opportunity to listen to patients, caregivers, healthcare officials, nurses, doctors, village, township, city officials on ways that we could make the law better and more productive, because it was pretty loose. And we wanted to make sure that indeed, if it is medical and medicine, that it be controlled as such, and this is our best attempt to do that.
And we should point out, as I did with your colleague on the Democratic side, with Senator Ananick a couple of weeks ago, the interpretation and enforcement varied from jurisdiction to jurisdiction, and that made it difficult for people who were trying to access medical marijuana. So, I mean, that was a problem too.
Yeah, right, and would be thought about differently or with different communities. So what we did is leave in place a lot of local control on how things are done, but given them a structure for which they can do that. An example would be the city of Lansing has 80 dispensaries. Now, if you take that and divide it by how many people there are in the city of Lansing, that's one dispensary for every 1,200 people. Seems excessive. So what this has done is give a structure to that, a framework to that, guarantees that what we're looking at in medical marijuana is actually being used as medicine. It's being tracked from seed to sale, and gives patients safe access to this, the law that people put in place in 2008.
Unrelated, but something that people will be interested in, corrections reform. You worked on a series of 19 bills, you said?
Yeah, it was 19 bills. Senator Pro's worked on this as a body of work that he's worked on from the House into the Senate. And 19 bills, every single one except one passed unanimously, bipartisan, and the one that didn't pass unanimously only had one no vote, and sent over now to the House for their consideration. This is a series of things of how are we getting people ready for parole? If they don't have the things that they need, why don't they have them? So that at their earliest release date, if they're ready to go, if they're not a danger to society, we can integrate them back into the society with a job and the skills that they need to be successful when they get out.
Talk to me about the cooperation, because the next thing I want to talk about is something I just returned from M City with the governor a couple of weeks ago. Fascinating visit, and obviously there was a big package of bills that I think may have more impact on Michigan's economic future than most anything else you could have done about the autonomous driving cars. That too passed unanimously. People like to remind me, those guys in Lansing don't get along, they can't cooperate, they don't work together. Well, they are working together. What is happening? Why is this coming at this time on some pretty big legislation? I mean, corrections reform is generally one of those kind of contentious issues.
Typically, but again, we're finding common ground on things which we can work to improve things in Michigan. Michigan has always been the leader in auto technology, not always having all the manufacturing, but this is the next logical sequence in that as we go forward. And this is the jobs that I want for my kids and my grandkids, the stuff that is high tech, high paying, helps diversify our economy. And we want to be known for that automotive technology and be the forefront and the thought of that. And this is the next part of that. And it also helps the Ypsilanti site, of which you spoke, to repurpose that, to make sure it can be used for all of that testing. It's like real-time testing because it's very large, has overpasses, roads, all kinds of things. It's not just modeling, it'll be actual testing.
When you think about that future, I mean, one of the things that candidate Rick Snyder talked about was changing Michigan's economy so you don't ride the boom and bust of the auto industry as we have for decades. And when I talked to him about this was kind of part of his interest in this. He wants to be ahead of the curve. Obviously, there are a lot of other states that are trying to do the same thing, but he wants to be ahead of the curve. Does this put us in that situation where, as that technology changes, we don't have to worry about catching up? Is this kind of a preemptive strike?
Well, if you've heard the GM folks and other people say that their business is going to change more in the next 5 years than it has in 50 years. And it has to do with this autonomous part of it. It's more not necessarily about you owning a car, it's about how do you get from point A to point B. And we have all kinds of other support things coming around that makes a lot of sense, like the company that came here, Switch, looking at all the types of things that we do with technology. This is an effort to make sure that we are in the forefront of that. And all those folks that left during the mid-'80s, when we had that exodus, we would like them to come back because we're going to have those jobs here.
One of the interesting things about those jobs you're talking about is that you've got to have people who are qualified to take them. And it might not seem such, but one of the other bills that you dealt with may move towards that, and that's the third grade reading bill. And I think there are some folks that may have the wrong impression of what that is. So tell me, first of all, the action you took, and tell me what you believe it will do.
This is a lot of work by Representative Price and Senator Phil Pavlo, and what it does is help and give tools to kids that are really struggling before third grade. And it's early intervention so that they can, when they get to third grade, if there's an obvious problem, there could be some retention there, and there's some parent input and the superintendent about if that child should be moved forward. The statistic and the stat that we like to cite, and I believe is so true, before third grade you're learning to read, and after third grade you read to learn. And that skill is so critical for them to move forward. And I think it's a great body of work. It was by a conference committee that it came out this week, and it passed the House and the Senate. It's on its way to the governor's desk.
One of the things that I was struck by this past week, I went to a curriculum conference at my child's elementary school, and they were talking about the importance of reading, and if you read at grade level, that your percentile chances of success, and by success graduating from the 12th grade, you're way up into the 80th
Yes.
and above. And if you're below grade, even by one letter position, your chances drop off dramatically. So getting people through high school, then to a trade or a college or whatever it is, will be crucial for filling those jobs, those high-tech jobs.
Yeah,
in which you speak.
absolutely. I mean, it's really, and the parental involvement on the front of it, I think, is the most important part, because it's not a surprise to them if their kid isn't doing well by the end of third grade. They're going to know right all the way along, so that they can intervene with the teacher to make sure that they get those skills.
For a long time, the legislature has been dealing with issues in Flint, and there's been more activity on that. Where are we in the recovery of Flint? I asked that largely because I put that question obviously to Senator Ananek, who is from there, but because one of the things, even though we were up there recently for another candidate visit, one of the things that you're struck by is at once every media outlet in the entire country was in Flint, and now they're not. And the problem still persists. I mean, there are obviously still needs. What is the legislature doing?
We just passed out of government operations this week the ability for the Flint to create a promise zone for education. So put forth an authority tool so that the city government there wants to use it for specific things. They'll be able to do that. And then the water report that's coming out, Flint report that's coming out from Senator Stamas in a few weeks, will also have some more action, legislative action, that we can do to make sure that water standards are correct, that they can't be messed around with, that they actually are true science, and that we have, at least as near as we can, try to prevent it from happening again. And I'm Jim Ananek, Senator Ananek is one of my personal friends, and I'll be in about 2 weeks. I'll be up there with him for the day, looking at all the stuff that's been going on. He's invited me, and I'm happy to go.
When you just talk about this conversation that we've had over these past few minutes, I mean, that is a lot of legislative activity. And again, I point out it is an election year. Is there a renewed effort on your part or on the entire Senate's part to get more of these things done? Because really, if you look at those 2 weeks, there was 1 week when you were waiting for the House, I think, on some items. You look at those 2 weeks, that's a lot of legislative activity in a very short period of time.
But remember that all the committee hearings, all the other things were going on prior to that. Sometimes it takes a little longer to get enough of the folks together to understand what problem it is you're trying to solve, and then what are the solutions? Can you agree on the solutions? And between Senator Ananek and I, we've been very successful at sitting down, saying, look, here's the problem to solve. Here's the 2 or 3 things we can do that we agree upon. The rest we'll keep working on, and let's keep the ball moving, because it's important for the citizens of Michigan to actually not think about their state government, that we're doing things in a way that doesn't interfere with their normal life, and we're trying to do that.
You've been in the legislature 12 years now?
A little over 10.
Yeah, that's right. You had the 2 terms. So tell me how it's different, how it's changed, what the attitude is, if it has.
It certainly has. I think for the general public, at least from what I hear in my district, is there's a lot more comfort and confidence that state government is actually functioning the way that it should. Now, most people would say it's a necessary evil, state government, but there are a lot of things that we need to do well, so that, again, as I said before, that people don't wake up every morning and think, what is Lansing doing to me today? That it functions the way that it should, and it's efficient as much as possible.
One of the things that the House dealt with and has been talked about for a long time, and I mean for a long time, and that's the Freedom of Information Acts, and changing it in the state to apply to lawmakers and the governor as it does in many other states. And I hedge that a little bit because states have different things that are covered. For example, in some states, a governor might be subject to FOIA for this group of activities and not for this group of activities. So with that said, the House passed out some bills that will be coming towards the Senate. What should we expect?
Yeah, I haven't read all of them yet. There's a number of them that I haven't read. So there's a number of things to which we already do. We're subject to Open Meetings Act. We report all the salary information for lawmakers and staff. And a lot of our Senate rules that we have mirror the sunshine laws of other states. So we already do a lot of it. My biggest concern is, and I think some of it's addressed in there, but I have to check a little more, is when a constituent interacts with my office, oftentimes there's personal information, Oftentimes they are perceived to be in trouble with the Treasury or DEQ, and they don't want that information to be public. So anything between the constituent and our office obviously would be off limits, and I want to make sure that they're protected, because otherwise why would they call my office for help? So we're going to make sure that those things are looked at, probably during lame duck, and we'll see where that goes. Again, I haven't read all of them yet, but I'm very interested.
Well, I want to talk to you about lame duck, but I bring up another question about that, because obviously there are those of us in the press that we want to know everything you do and everything you say. On the other hand, not just constituents, but for example, you mentioned earlier Switch. They had conversations with lawmakers prior to any announcement, but because of the nature of their business, they didn't want that out there too. So some of those things might be subject to FOIA, and that could be difficult for them.
It could be a competitive disadvantage for somebody at that point. I mean, they talk to lawmakers, other companies talk to lawmakers about, is this possible in Michigan? Are you open to this type of stuff in Michigan? And I want to say we are, for me and the Senate, we really want to make sure that we are open and welcome to a lot of new industries, a lot of new things. I mean, the welcome mat's going to be open, and we want to try our best not to put barriers in their way. We want them to come to Michigan.
Let's talk about lame duck. We're getting a little ahead of ourselves. There's an election between now and then, but after that election, whatever the outcome is, there will be a bunch of lawmakers over in the House who will no longer be in the House in January, and all of the senators, as I pointed out earlier, will come back. There are no elections for senators, but that period of time from November until the end of the year is sometimes kind of chaotic, because
sometimes
well,
you've been there enough, you know. It's
typically
it's
always chaotic.
Yeah,
what do we expect this year?
There's a number of things that we still need to work on, energy being one of them. There's a few other things, maybe the FOIA stuff. But for the most part, we're going to have folks that really are looking at, if they've served their 6 years, they may have a particular issue they've been working on for their constituents or their community for the whole time they're there, and they're not been able to get it done. And so we're going to try to do that if it makes sense. I mean, it has to make sense for all of Michigan, and you can't just pick and choose them. You have to do things that are generally in the best interest of the constituents.
And let's finish our conversation with one of those subjects you brought up, which is energy. That has proven to be, at least in the conversations, a difficult subject for people to get their arms around. It was difficult when you did it last time.
Yes.
And it really does have, we talk about impact on the future, it has a big impact. Is the question about choice and how much reserve that those choice companies have to have, is that kind of where the argument is, or the concern is?
That's some of the argument, and for your viewers, I think most of them think about their energy when they look at their bill, how much they got to pay, and they want the lights to go on when they hit the switch. But it is way more complicated than that, between generation, transmission, these open retail access type things with people that are on choice. A lot of our government entities, a lot of our schools are on retail choice, which saves them a lot of money. But we have an ever-growing or a different changing atmosphere as the federal government shuts down on a lot of these coal plants, and we haven't built another one recently, and it takes a while to build. So that open retail access market is generally because we have too much energy being generated. So if there isn't as much generated, how do you keep that open, and how does that happen? And that is one of the big questions.
And that could consume a lot of time if you bring that up in
It could, yes.
So whatever happens, it looks like the legislature will be back after the election, and we'll be following them then to find out just exactly what happens in that so-called lame duck session. But before that, there is an election coming up. We'll talk more about that next. To the point. So now we enter what truly is the home stretch for the presidential election. Decision 2016. As I pointed out, just over 6 weeks away, and the polls have tightened up across the board. Of course, we talk about the national polls that had been less than 0.1%. Hillary Clinton appears to have started to stretch out a bit of a lead, but still within what could be considered a margin of error. The real numbers that count, however, will be in those battleground states, the important states that will change electoral votes from one column to the other. Remember, it takes 270 electoral votes to win, and that's what both candidates are looking for. Right now, Secretary Clinton has a lead in states that are leaning her way, but Donald Trump is fighting hard in some of those battleground states, including Michigan. We're going to be talking about that in the weeks to come. When you join us, 10 o'clock on Sunday morning for To the Point.